grave whisper. Deep in Florida lies Huguenot Cemetery.
I didn't believe in haunted cemeteries. Not the way people talk about them online. Not the way tourists whisper about ghost lights and shadow figures. And definitely not enough to feel afraid of a place that had been quiet for nearly 200 years. But Huguenot Cemetery changed that. It sits just outside Jacksonville, Florida. Small, overgrown, and easy to miss unless you already know it's there. No iron gates, no warning signs, just a patch of uneven ground where history refuses to stay buried. The kind of place locals pass without looking and never, ever visit at night. The first thing you notice isn't the gravestones, it's the silence. No birds, no insects, no wind even when the trees beyond the cemetery are moving. I arrived just before sunset, recorder in my pocket, camera slung low at my side. I told myself I was there to document history, nothing more. Huguenot Cemetery dates back to the early 1800s, built for French Protestant settlers fleeing religious persecution. Men, women, children, entire families buried here after crossing an ocean to escape death, only to find it waiting anyway. Many graves aren't marked at all. Others lean forward as if sinking or listening. As the light faded, the temperature dropped in a way that didn't feel natural. Florida evenings don't cool like that, not suddenly, not all at once. That's when I heard the first sound. Footsteps, slow, measured, behind me. I turned immediately. Nothing. No one. Just rows of graves and the low orange glow of the dying sun. I told myself it was an animal, a raccoon, maybe someone walking along the nearby road. But the sound came again, this time closer. The gravel didn't crunch, the grass didn't rustle. It sounded like bare feet on dry earth. I took a step back, heart beating harder than I expected. I've walked through abandoned hospitals. I've stood inside burned-out churches at midnight. None of those places made me feel like I was being watched the way Huguenot Cemetery did. That's when I noticed something else. Every grave I'd passed was now facing me. I don't mean literally turned. I mean the names, the worn carvings, the angles of the stones. My mind suddenly convinced they were all aligned toward where I stood, toward me. A breeze finally moved through the cemetery, carrying a smell I can only describe as damp stone and old soil, freshly turned earth, even though nothing had been disturbed. Then a voice whispered my name. Not shouted, not spoken loudly, whispered, right beside my ear. I froze. I didn't recognize the voice, but it was male, calm, almost polite, and it spoke with an accent that felt old, not Southern, not modern, French. I ran. I didn't look back. I didn't care about the camera or the recorder. I didn't stop until I reached my car, hands shaking so badly I dropped the keys twice before getting the door open. When I finally drove away, I told myself I'd imagined everything, until I checked my recorder. It had been off the entire time, except for one file. 32 seconds long, recorded at a time I hadn't pressed anything. All it contained was slow breathing and footsteps, walking closer.
I didn't plan on going back to Huguenot Cemetery. After that first night, I told myself the recording was a glitch, radio interference, wind against the microphone, anything that made sense. Fear has a way of inventing patterns when the dark gets too quiet. But 3 days later, I found myself parked on the same narrow road again, staring at the same stretch of uneven ground. Daylight changes nothing there. The cemetery still feels wrong. Up close, the graves tell a story most visitors never notice. Many headstones have no names, no dates, just rough stone markers, half swallowed by the earth. Others are cracked down the middle, as if something beneath them tried to push upward and failed. Local records explain part of it. In the early 1800s, disease moved faster than medicine. Yellow fever, dysentery, children dying before they could even be baptized. Families buried their dead quickly, often without proper markers, afraid the illness would spread if the bodies remained above ground too long. But records don't explain everything. There are more graves than names, and some don't match any documented deaths at all. I met an elderly man named Thomas who lived nearby his entire life. He refused to walk through the cemetery, even during the day. When I asked why, he stared at the ground for a long time before answering. "Because some of them never left," he said. Thomas told me stories passed down through generations, stories locals stopped sharing with outsiders because they didn't want attention, didn't want curiosity turning into disrespect. Children, mostly, seen between the graves just after sunset, not running, not laughing, standing, watching. He described them as pale shapes in old-fashioned clothing, faces blurred like unfinished paintings. If you looked directly at them, they'd fade, but if you pretended not to notice, they'd follow, always silently. One story stood out. In 1946, a family visiting relatives' graves brought their young son with them. He wandered off for less than a minute. When they found him, he was standing beside an unmarked grave, staring straight down at the ground. When his mother asked what he was doing, he replied, waiting for them to come back. He never explained who they were. That night, he woke screaming, claiming children were standing at the foot of his bed, their feet covered in dirt, asking him why he'd taken his place. He refused to speak again until the day he died. Standing among the graves, I tried to tell myself these were just stories. Folklore grows in places where history feels incomplete. Fear fills gaps the mind can't explain. But then I noticed something. Some unmarked graves were smaller, too small for adults, arranged in uneven rows, almost like someone had tried to keep them separate. I knelt near one of them, brushing dirt away from the stone. The ground felt colder here. Not shaded cool, not evening cool, dead cool. Then I felt it, a pressure behind my eyes. Not pain, memory. Images flashed in my mind that weren't mine. a woman crying in French, hands gripping a small wooden cross, the sound of shovels striking wet soil over and over again. Then, screaming, high-pitched, panicked, too many voices at once. I pulled back hard, gasping for breath, my heart racing. The feeling vanished instantly, leaving behind only silence and something else. Footprints, small ones, fresh, leading away from the grave. I stood slowly, every nerve on edge. The prints stopped near a large oak tree at the edge of the cemetery. Beneath it, hanging from a low branch, was a ribbon, white, weathered, tied in a simple knot. Thomas later told me about the ribbons. Families used to tie them near graves of children, hoping spirits would recognize kindness and leave the living alone. Over time, the practice stopped, but the spirits didn't. As I walked back to my car, the air felt heavier, like the cemetery was holding its breath. And just before I stepped onto the road, I heard it. A child's voice, soft, curious. Why didn't you stay?
There used to be a caretaker at Huguenot Cemetery. Most people don't know that. They assume it's always been abandoned, left to sink slowly into the Florida soil. But in the early 1980s, the city assigned a groundskeeper to maintain it, trim the weeds, reset fallen stones, keep vandals away. His name was Daniel Mercer, and he lasted exactly 9 months. I tracked down a copy of his resignation letter through public records. It was short, barely half a page. The final line read, "I cannot continue to maintain grounds that refuse to stay still." At first, I thought it was metaphorical, dramatic wording from a man tired of hard labor. But after speaking to his daughter, now in her 50s, I realized he hadn't been exaggerating. Daniel Mercer was not a superstitious man. He was a veteran, a practical thinker, the kind of man who believed in what he could hold, measure, and repair. But he began coming home different, quieter. He told his wife that headstones he reset during the day would lean again overnight, not fallen from wind, but turned at slight angles, subtle shifts, as if someone had adjusted them carefully, not random, intentional. He began marking their positions with chalk lines in the soil. The next morning, the stones would be inches outside those marks. He assumed vandalism at first, teenagers sneaking in after dark, but there were never footprints, no tire tracks, no broken branches along the perimeter, just movement. One evening, determined to prove it was human interference, Daniel stayed past sunset. He locked the outer chain barrier himself and waited inside his truck with a thermos of coffee and a flashlight resting on the dashboard. He told his wife later that the cemetery changed the moment the sun disappeared. The air thickened, sound dulled, even the insects stopped. Around 9:17 p.m., he saw the first shadow. It moved between 2 grave markers in the far left section, small, low to the ground. He assumed it was a stray animal, until it stood upright. He stepped out of the truck, calling out, expecting a child or trespasser to bolt. No one ran. Instead, 3 more shapes appeared, short, still, watching him. Daniel raised his flashlight. The beam flickered, not died, flickered, and in that stuttering light, he saw them clearly. children, but wrong. Their clothing looked soaked, clinging to thin limbs, their faces pale, almost gray, eyes too dark for the surrounding dusk. He shouted again. One of them tilted its head, and then every headstone behind them shifted, not falling, turning, all at once, like an audience adjusting to face a stage. Daniel dropped the flashlight. When he bent to pick it up, the children were closer. He swore later that he never saw their feet move. They simply shortened the distance. And then one of them spoke, not loudly, not angrily, just confused. "Why do you keep fixing them?" Daniel stumbled backward toward his truck, fumbling for his keys. The chain barrier he had locked earlier now hung loose, swaying slightly as if someone had just passed through. He drove home without turning his headlights off until he reached his driveway. The next morning, he returned only long enough to collect his tools. He never stepped inside the cemetery again. According to his daughter, he started sleeping with the lights on, and sometimes, very late at night, he would wake up suddenly, staring toward the hallway, as if expecting someone small to be standing there. When I finished reading his resignation letter again, I realized something I hadn't noticed before. The date. It matched exactly 1 week before my first visit. 40 years apart, same week, same month. That night, as I reviewed my footage from my second visit, I paused on a frame near the oak tree with the white ribbon. There, just beyond the trunk, 4 shapes, standing together, facing the camera. And as the frame brightened, the headstones behind them weren't facing outward anymore. They were turned toward me.
I couldn't stop thinking about the recorder. The one I left off in Huguenot Cemetery during my first visit. 32 seconds of silence, or at least that's what I told myself, until I played it again, this time with headphones in the quiet of my apartment. The first few seconds were normal, faint hiss, the low rustle of leaves, then a subtle whisper. Not in English, French, soft, deliberate, almost musical, like someone reciting a poem. At first, I couldn't make out the words. My knowledge of French was limited to bonjour and merci, but something about the intonation, the way it rose and fell, made my skin crawl. I ran the clip through a translator app. The result froze me in place. The voice said clearly, "Vous avez trouvé nos enfants. Pourquoi êtes-vous ici?" You have found our children. Why are you here? I rewound, played it again. The whisper repeated, always the same words, same tone, same cadence, and then, underneath it, barely audible, another layer, a second voice. It was childish, curious, quiet yet insistent. Ils viennent, ils viennent. They are coming, they are coming. I froze. My apartment suddenly felt too small, too bright, too loud. My hands trembled as I set the recorder on the table. I didn't sleep that night. By morning, I knew I had to return. Not out of bravery, I have never claimed to be brave, but out of necessity. I needed to understand who or what was speaking. I returned to the cemetery a week later, just before sunset. The oak tree with the white ribbon still stood, though the ribbon had faded further, fraying at the edges. The air smelled damp and old, exactly as before.
I set up the recorder again, positioning it near one of the unmarked graves. Then I waited. At first, nothing. The sun dipped low, shadows grew long, and then a soft crunch, barefoot, deliberate, behind me. I spun around. No one, just gravestones leaning slightly, as if in curiosity. The whispers began again, closer this time. I held my breath. Pourquoi ici? Pourquoi ici? And then it said a name that appeared in no city records, no birth certificate, no death certificate, not in any archives I could access. Lucien. The sound of the word made my chest tighten. Lucien. I froze, scanning the cemetery. The gravestones didn't move, but the air changed, thicker, denser, heavy with expectation. A chill ran down my spine when I realized I could see faint shapes in the distance. At first, I thought it was my imagination, just shadows cast by the setting sun. But the shapes weren't human, or maybe they were, and I just couldn't process them correctly. Small, hunched figures, gliding rather than walking, watching, waiting, and one figure, slightly taller than the rest, seemed to be reaching for something, for me. The French whisper continued, more urgent. Ils viennent pour Lucien. They are coming for Lucien. The hairs on my neck stood on end. My hands shook as I picked up the recorder, desperately trying to capture the voices, the sound, the presence that I could not explain. Then I felt it, a brush against my arm, cold like ice water. I spun again, nothing. When I turned back toward the graves, one of the unmarked stones had shifted again, not just turned, lifted slightly, as if something beneath it had tried to peek out. I dropped the recorder. It hit the ground and continued recording on its own. The whispering grew louder, and then a laugh, soft, childish, but hollow, empty. It didn't come from behind the gravestones. It came from the ground itself. I ran out of the cemetery, down the narrow road, not daring to look back. Back in my apartment, I listened to the recording again, and that's when I heard it. The soft, deliberate steps of more than one child, approaching, then stopping, and finally the whisper, Lucien, nous t'attendons. Lucien, we are waiting for you.
After the recording, I could no longer ignore the stories of children seen in Huguenot Cemetery. Locals speak of them in hushed tones, as if saying their names aloud might summon them. They call them les enfants perdus, the lost children. I had my own proof now, in voices captured on tape, and a name, Lucien. I returned, this time with a small flashlight, my recorder, and the faint hope that I could rationalize what I was about to see. The cemetery was quiet that evening, too quiet. Even the wind seemed hesitant. I walked past the oak tree and toward the section with the smallest graves, the unmarked ones, the children's graves. Then I heard it. Laughter. Soft, fleeting, the sound of little feet running across dead leaves. It wasn't playful, it was deliberate, as if someone was teasing me, daring me to follow. I froze. My recorder lay in my hand, ready. Then I saw them. 4 small shapes moving just beyond the gravestones. Their clothing was soaked and tattered, hanging from tiny frames. Their faces blurred in the dim light, like smudges on an old photograph. They didn't run.
They didn't hide, they simply watched, and then one of them stepped forward. A girl, no older than 7. She reached out her hand. Her eyes, I couldn't see her eyes, only darkness where they should have been. I wanted to move forward, to touch her hand, to reassure her that I wasn't a threat, but my legs refused. The others began to circle me silently, their tiny feet making no sound on the leaf-covered ground. And then I understood. These children were not just children. They were guides. They wanted me to follow. A chill swept over me as I noticed a small path forming between the graves. It hadn't been there moments before. It wasn't on any map, but it beckoned. I took a cautious step forward. A whisper floated through the air. "Lucien, viens. Lucien, come." I froze. My name isn't Lucien. I've never been called Lucien in my life, and yet my heart skipped, my mind twisted. Something deep inside me, a memory I didn't know I had, responded. The girl held out her hand again. This time I felt the pull, not physical, not magnetic, but something stronger, deeper, a compulsion. Behind me, the recorder captured everything, every whisper, every shuffle of feet, every sigh. I forced myself to step backward. The shadows of the children remained still, but then, one by one, they began to fade, not like normal fading, like smoke rising from a candle, curling and twisting before vanishing completely. And then I saw him, Lucien. He was taller than the others, almost like a teenager, though his body was thin and fragile. His head tilted, studying me, assessing, and for the first time I saw his eyes, hollow, black, with a glint of something ancient, sorrowful, patient, and hungry. "Why are you here?" I whispered, barely audible. He tilted his head, the silence stretched, and then the whispers came again. Not just French this time, old French, impossible to translate fully. It spoke of promises, of death, of unfinished games. It spoke of waiting. The children, now gone, had returned to their graves. Lucien remained, and I understood with a clarity that chilled me to my core. These spirits did not want to harm me, not yet, but they wanted me to see, to remember, to acknowledge. The pull didn't end when I stepped back. It followed me, in my chest, in my mind, in my blood. The cemetery had marked me, and I had no choice but to leave, at least for now. As I reached the road and looked back, the shadows of the gravestones seemed heavier, like the weight of eyes pressing through stone, watching, waiting. And in that moment, I realized Huguenot Cemetery wasn't haunted in the way people imagine. There were no angry spirits, no fleeting ghosts trying to scare visitors for fun. It was alive. Not in a living sense, not like humans, but alive with memory, with children who never grew up, with a Lucien who never left. And once you felt their presence, once you heard their whispers, they never truly let you go.
Huguenot Cemetery has many stories, but the most unnerving one is about the oak tree. Not just any oak, the one near the center of the grounds where the white ribbon still clings to a low branch. Locals whisper that it breathes, that it watches, that it remembers. I didn't believe it, not fully. I thought it was a metaphor, a poetic way of describing the weight of history pressing down through the branches. I was wrong. I arrived just after sunset, the sky bruised purple and orange. The cemetery was silent, but I could feel it, the shift in the air, the tension in the ground. I positioned my recorder a few feet from the oak, notebook in hand, flashlight off. I wanted to observe without influencing. At first, nothing. Then, a subtle movement in the leaves. Not wind. The air was still. The branches quivered like the tree was drawing a deep, slow breath. I froze. And then I noticed the roots. They weren't ordinary roots. Some lifted slightly, as if sniffing the air. Others curled over the ground, moving almost imperceptibly toward the unmarked graves. A whisper floated across the cemetery, soft, French, almost a sigh. Ils reviennent. They are returning. My hair on my arms stood on end. I stepped closer, notebook in hand, flashlight trembling. The tree's bark seemed darker, richer, almost wet. And then I realized the tree's shadow moved independently of the light. It stretched, twisted, coiling around graves, shaping itself into the forms of small children. The whisper came again, louder this time. Lucien. I shivered. The air felt alive. I could feel it pressing against my chest, heavier than gravity. My pulse raced. The earth beneath my feet trembled slightly, a heartbeat in rhythm with the whispers. Then I saw them, the children, emerging from between gravestones, one by one. They moved unnaturally, almost gliding, their eyes dark voids reflecting the moonlight. They formed a semicircle around the oak. The tree shifted again, and this time the ribbon moved, lifting as though caught in a gentle wind, though the air was still. And the shadows of the children merged with the tree, their forms indistinguishable from the gnarled branches. I wanted to scream, but I couldn't. Then I noticed something impossible. The tree's trunk had eyes. Not literal eyes, but knots and cracks aligned to form pupils, and they blinked, slowly, deliberately, watching me, studying me. A cold, wet sensation ran along my arms and legs. The whispers grew urgent, overlapping in a chorus of voices, both adult and child. Il est ici. Il a trouvé Lucien. He is here. He has found Lucien. My breath caught. I tried to step back. The children didn't move. The tree didn't sway, but the roots shifted, curling around my boots. Not enough to hurt, but enough to terrify. Enough to remind me that the cemetery itself was alive. And then Lucien appeared. Tall, thin, impossible. His gaze locked on me, and for the first time I felt the pull. Magnetic, irresistible, like gravity was different here, like something beneath the earth wanted me to kneel. I stumbled back, heart racing, and tripped over one of the smaller roots. When I scrambled to my feet, Lucien was gone, the children too, but the tree remained, watching, breathing, waiting. I left the cemetery that night, but the memory of the oak, its eyes, and the whispers followed me. Even weeks later, I could feel it in my dreams, standing beneath the tree, the children circling, Lucien's voice, soft, patient. Tu reviendras. You will return. And I knew it was true. Huguenot Cemetery doesn't let go, not of the living, not of the curious, not of those who have heard the whispers and walked among the graves. It is patient, it is aware, and it waits for those who are drawn into its history. I have seen it, I have felt it, and I know that some nights when the wind dies and the shadows grow long, the tree is alive in ways most cannot comprehend. The cemetery is not just a resting place. It is a sentinel, a collector, a reminder that some histories, some souls, never truly rest.
Some warnings come too late. Some stories are told after the damage is done. Huguenot Cemetery is like that. The spirits don't just stay inside its gates, they follow. I learned this the hard way. It started after my 6th visit. I had spent hours among the graves, documenting whispers, shadows, and the oak tree that seemed to breathe. I left just as the sun dipped below the horizon. The cemetery looked peaceful in the fading light, but I could still feel it watching, waiting. When I got home, I thought I had escaped. I didn't. It began subtly. Footsteps in the hallway. At first, I blamed the old house settling, but the footsteps were too soft, too deliberate, always in the same rhythm, small, cautious, almost childlike. Then came the whispers, soft French, barely audible. Lucien. It wasn't outside, not in the yard, not carried by the wind. It was inside my apartment, in the walls, in the air, in the room with me. I checked the recorder from my last visit. It had captured nothing unusual beyond the cemetery, yet the sounds were real. They were there. The first night I stayed awake, lights on, heart hammering, every creak of the floor, every flicker of shadow against the walls sent my pulse racing. By the second night, it escalated. Footprints appeared, small, bare, pressed into the dust on my hardwood floors, leading from the hallway toward my bedroom. I swore I had cleaned the floors that morning. Every footprint matched the size of the children I had seen at the cemetery. I followed them. They ended at the foot of my bed. I didn't sleep that night. The third night was worse. I awoke to a whisper directly in my ear, not recorded, not imagined, real, French, a child's voice, soft and hollow. Pourquoi ne reviens-tu pas? Why do you not return? I bolted upright. Nothing, but the air felt heavier, charged, the room colder than it should have been, and then I saw it. A shadow, a small figure just beyond the edge of my bed, lean, indistinct, featureless, but unmistakably human. It didn't move, it didn't blink, it just watched. I reached for my phone, light on. It vanished instantly, but the cold remained. Over the following days, things escalated. Doors that were locked opened on their own. Drawers pulled halfway out. Items moved just slightly, as if brushed by invisible hands. And always whispers, French whispers, calling, waiting. I realized something terrifying. The Huguenot Cemetery didn't just haunt its grounds, it extended outward, reaching for those who had seen its secrets, those who had heard its voices, those who had walked among its graves. I tried leaving town, driving hundreds of miles away, but even there, shadows appeared in my peripheral vision. Whispering followed me in the quiet of the night. Footsteps echoed when no one was there. I could smell the damp earth sometimes, even hundreds of miles from the cemetery. One night, I woke to find footprints across the carpet leading to my bedroom window. Small, bare, pressed lightly as if weightless, and at the window, an imprint, the shape of a small hand pressed into the glass. No fingerprints, no texture, just the shadow of a hand. I understood then. Huguenot Cemetery doesn't just claim its dead, it claims the living who come too close. It marks them, it waits, and once marked,
you are never truly free. Even now, when I'm awake and alone, I feel it, watching, waiting, the pull of the oak, the whispers of children, Lucien's eyes, black and hollow, following me across miles and hours. I can't go back, I can't return to the cemetery, and yet I can't escape it. And that's the true horror of Huguenot Cemetery. It doesn't just haunt the dead, it haunts the living. And once it touches you, you are never truly alone again.
Huguenot Cemetery is not just a place of rest. It is a place of secrets. Some graves are known, documented, recorded in city archives. Families visit them, flowers are placed, names are remembered. But others? The forgotten tombs. Unmarked, unrecorded, ignored by history. And yet, alive. I began investigating them after noticing something on my last visit. Near the southern edge of the cemetery, away from the oak and the main rows, a series of depressions in the ground caught my eye. Uneven, shallow, different from the normal settling of old graves. I cleared away debris and weeds. Beneath, I found small wooden markers, splintered and worn. No names, no dates, just letters, faded almost to nothing. A, M, L, H. I later discovered these were initials of children who had died long ago, some during the yellow fever outbreaks, others in accidents or unknown circumstances. Families had abandoned them, records had been lost, and the cemetery had quietly swallowed them. I brought a local historian with me the next day, a woman named Isabel. She had studied Huguenot Cemetery for decades. When I showed her the markers, her face paled. "These aren't supposed to be here," she whispered. "Some of these names, some of these don't exist in any registry. They were never recorded. The city doesn't acknowledge them. They were erased." Erased. And that explained the whispers I had captured, the children I had seen, Lucien, the shadows that followed me home. These children were forgotten by the living, but not by the dead. We decided to investigate further. Isabel suggested careful documentation, photographs, measurements, notes. But even as we worked, the air grew heavier. The ground beneath our feet seemed to pulse, subtle at first, then stronger, like a heartbeat. The children came. Not all at once, just glimpses, shadows moving between the graves, pale faces blurred in the waning light, eyes dark, watching, waiting. One figure approached Isabel, a girl, small, her head tilted unnaturally, reaching out. Isabel froze, pale as bone. Isabel whispered, "She's asking to be remembered." The girl's tiny hand hovered over one of the splintered markers. Then she vanished. That night, back at my apartment, the recorder captured soft scratching sounds, tiny fingernails against wood, almost imperceptible but consistent. They weren't on the table, not in the room. They came from somewhere else. Lucien's name was whispered again, more urgently than ever. The children wanted recognition. They wanted their graves acknowledged, their deaths admitted, their existence validated.
and the forgotten tombs, they were the center of it all. I returned the next day with flowers, not to placate them, not to appease them, but to honor them, to acknowledge that they had been here, that they mattered. As I placed a flower on the splintered wood of one small grave, I felt a hand brush mine, not cold, not hot, just there, light as air, and a whisper. Merci. I didn't know if it was one child or many, but for a brief moment the pressure in the air lifted, the whispers softened, the shadows receded. Yet I knew it wouldn't last. Huguenot Cemetery never forgets. Those who are remembered may rest easier. Those who are forgotten remain restless. And the more I documented, the more I realized the truth. The forgotten tombs are alive with memory, with sorrow, with longing. They watch, they wait, they reach out, and anyone who comes too close, anyone who dares to uncover what has been erased, is marked. Marked by whispers, by shadows, by the weight of souls the living cannot fully comprehend. I left that day with a mixture of fear and reverence. I had touched something sacred, something dangerous, and I knew the forgotten tombs would continue to call.
It happened on the night I least expected it. After weeks of recordings, observations, and whispers, I thought I understood Huguenot Cemetery. I thought I could document it safely, like an outsider looking in. But that night, I learned the cemetery does not allow spectators, only participants. I returned just after midnight, armed with my camera, recorder, flashlight, and a trembling sense of courage I didn't feel. The air was unnaturally still. The trees stood rigid, shadows long and black, as if ink had spilled across the ground. I positioned myself near the oak tree with the white ribbon, the place where the children first appeared. I had seen Lucien only in glimpses, in shadows, whispers, never fully. Tonight, I would see him. Hours passed. The wind did not stir, the leaves did not rustle, but I felt it, presence, watching, waiting, patient. Then I heard it, the voice, clear, unmistakable, French. Lucien, viens ici. Lucien, come here. I froze, heart hammering, and then I saw him. Lucien emerged from the shadows, taller than any child should be, his thin frame bending unnaturally. His eyes, black voids, endless, ancient, locked onto me. I felt them pierce straight through my chest. Around him, the children appeared, pale, silent, hovering just above the ground, their tiny faces featureless, their eyes voids of longing and accusation. Lucien spoke, softly, not a whisper this time, but a voice that resonated in my mind. You have come too far. You have seen what should not be seen, and yet you remain. The air thickened, pressing against my lungs. My flashlight flickered, then died. The recorder in my hand hummed with static. Footsteps echoed around me, small, deliberate, circling, but no one moved. I tried to speak. My voice caught. My body refused. Lucien stepped closer,
The shadows stretched and merged with him. The children's forms blended into the darkness of the oak, as if the tree itself had grown limbs to reach toward me. "Do you understand now?" he said. "This place, this cemetery, is not yours. You are ours, as we are of it." I felt a pull, not physical, but something stronger, deeper, gravity of the grave, weight of the forgotten, tugging at my very soul. I wanted to flee. My legs obeyed partially, but I stumbled, almost falling into one of the shallow, unmarked graves. The whispers rose, overlapping, urgent, pleading. "Lucien, guide, guide." The oak tree seemed to lean toward me. Its branches creaked. The white ribbon fluttered even without wind. The air carried the smell of damp earth, rot, and cold stone. Then Lucien's hand extended toward me, not threatening, not violent, expectant, patient, demanding recognition. "Will you remember us?" he asked. I swallowed hard. My mind raced. This was no longer just a story, no longer a haunted site. This was consciousness, centuries of sorrow, tragedy, and memory pressed into a single terrifying presence. I nodded, though my voice failed me. Instantly, the air shifted, the pull receded slightly, the children's whispers softened, shadows lifted just enough to see the ribbon on the oak ripple gently, like a sigh. Lucien's gaze lingered, hollow eyes studying me. Then, as if satisfied, he faded into the darkness. The children followed. The oak seemed still, silent. I stood there for what felt like hours, my body shaking, recorder clutched tightly, flashlight still dead in my hand. And then I understood the truth of Huguenot Cemetery. Lucien, the children, the oak, they are not evil, not malicious. They are memory, they are sorrow, they are the forgotten and the erased, demanding acknowledgement from the living. But they are patient, and if you do not respect them, they will not release you. I left the cemetery at dawn, heart heavy, mind exhausted. I did not look back, but I could feel it, Lucien's gaze lingering like a shadow at the edge of my vision, reminding me that the cemetery never forgets. And I knew, without question, I would return someday, not by choice, not willingly, but because once marked by Huguenot Cemetery, the living are bound to it as much as the dead.
I returned home after that night with Lucien. The sunrise should have felt like relief, safety, freedom. It didn't. Huguenot Cemetery had left its mark, not on my body, not visibly, but deep inside me, in my mind, my senses, my very being. The whispers lingered, soft at first, then stronger. In the quiet of the night, I could hear them, French phrases, childlike tones, calling, pleading, demanding attention. Footsteps echoed in empty hallways, shadows flickered in peripheral vision, objects moved slightly when I wasn't looking, and sometimes, briefly, I could smell the damp soil, the cold stone, the scent of graves freshly turned, as if the cemetery had followed me across miles. I realized something terrifying. Huguenot Cemetery is not confined to its boundaries. Its influence spreads through memory, through acknowledgement, through those who witness it. And once it chooses you, there is no undoing it. I tried to rationalize,
Perhaps it was trauma. Perhaps my mind had conjured these things after weeks of obsessive research, recordings, and night visits. But the evidence was undeniable. The recorder I had left running captured sounds that could not exist outside the cemetery. Whispers, footsteps, soft taps against unseen surfaces, and always the name, Lucien. One evening, I awoke to the sound of laughter, high-pitched, fleeting, and impossibly close. I grabbed the recorder, trembling. The playback revealed nothing, but the whisper in the darkness just behind my ear repeated, "Lucien, viens." I shivered, knowing full well I was not in the cemetery, not physically, yet it did not matter. Even during the day, the pull persisted. Shadows bent toward me. Sunlight seemed dimmer where I stood. Even friends remarked on my haunted expression, though I refused to explain why. Huguenot Cemetery is patient. Lucien is patient. The children are patient. They do not need to rush. Time bends for them. They wait for the living to notice, to remember, to acknowledge. And for those who do, there is a subtle mark. I noticed mine first on nights I awoke suddenly, a pressure in my chest, a heartbeat not my own, small indentations on the soles of my feet where no one could have stepped, a faint chill around my wrists as if tiny hands had brushed past. And in photographs, shadows appear where none existed, shapes that vanish when looked at directly, eyes that follow, hollow and patient. I understand now. The cemetery does not forget. Lucien does not forget. And once you are marked, the connection never fades. I have learned to live with it. I keep my lights dim, my windows closed. I do not venture out after dark, but sometimes, when the wind is still and the shadows grow long, I hear the soft, childlike whispers. Tu reviendras. You will return. And I know it is not a threat. It is an inevitability. I have walked among graves that should not be seen, and I have looked into the eyes of the forgotten. I have heard the whispers of children who died too young, and I have faced Lucien himself. Huguenot Cemetery is alive, not in the sense of humans or animals, but alive with memory, sorrow, and presence. It watches, waits, and occasionally reaches beyond its gates to touch those who have acknowledged it. And I have. I am marked. The white ribbon still exists in my dreams. The oak tree grows taller, larger, its branches curling into the darkness like the fingers of unseen children. The voices are quiet now, but they are patient. They wait for the night. They wait for my return. One day, I know I will go back. Not because I want to, not because I am brave, but because once Huguenot Cemetery has chosen you, once Lucien has called you, the connection never breaks. And that is the ultimate horror, because the cemetery does not rest. The dead do not rest, and neither will you. Huguenot Cemetery waits, always, and someday you will hear the whisper. Lucien.